Okay, so right now, Labour are roughly 17 points ahead in the polls, and it's widely understood that a general election is going to take place next year. If polling's correct, then you could be moving to number 11 alongside Keir Starmer in number 10. What would your top priorities be in your first 100 days in office?
Well, I've been an MP now for 13 and a half years, and all of that time has been spent in opposition. So the fact that we are within touching distance of forming the next government is incredibly exciting, but we're not taking anything for granted. We have to work for every single vote, and that is what we're determined to do. But if I could just picture myself there for a moment, and what would we do in the first 100 days? Well, my number one mission is to grow the economy, because if we can make Britain better off, we can make working people better off. And that's what I want to do, because for the last 13 years, wages have been flat, growth has been on the floor, prices of food, energy, mortgages, rents, all of those have gone through the roof. So I want to make Britain better off. And that means getting the economy growing. It means unlocking private investment so that businesses decide to invest here in Britain. And one way we would do that is create a new national wealth fund to invest alongside business in some of the industries of the future, from floating offshore wind to gigafactories to electric vehicles, tidal energy, carbon capture and storage. Some of these industries of the future where they're going to be good jobs paying decent wages. But we also know that our public services are on their knees right now. Our schools, our hospitals, our police. So a couple of tax changes that I would make in the first budget as Labour Chancellor of the Exchequer. First of all, I believe if you make your home in Britain, you should pay your taxes here. And so we would get rid of the non-dom tax status, which means if your dad was born abroad, even though you might have lived all of your life here, you can claim for tax purposes you're registered elsewhere. We would do away with that, and we would put that money into our National Health Service. And we would get rid of the exemption that at the moment you don't pay VAT or business rates if you're a private school. And we would use that money to invest in our children, the 93% who are in state schools, with more teachers, a mental health hub in every secondary school. And those are just some of the changes. And, you know, I am in a hurry. We've been 13 and a half years in opposition. Those are just some of the things that I want to do in government.
So related to that, in your speech today, you referenced Securonomics. And just for our viewers, do you want to sort of briefly explain what you mean by that?
Yes, so by Securonomics, I mean securing family finances by making our national economy more secure and more resilient. In the past, there's been this sort of preference for the cheapest and the fastest and the quickest. We haven't cared enough about where things are made or who is making them. And that era of globalisation as we know it today, is dead. Where things are made and who makes them does matter, and I want to make, do and sell more here in Britain. That will give our national economy more security in the face of shocks, whether they be wars or pandemics or global rivalries or indeed the climate crisis. I want to secure good jobs and investment here in Britain.
So just staying on that, and obviously you mentioned the war in Ukraine and some other international factors last year. Do you think that the Securonomics approach will be able to overcome these international factors that you've mentioned?
Well, look, obviously the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is first and foremost a tragedy for the people caught up in it in Ukraine. But it has had big implications for what's happened to energy prices and food prices as well. But at the moment we are over-reliant on Russia and the Middle East for our basic energy needs. That's why I'm so excited by the potential that zero carbon electricity has to both create good jobs here in Britain, get people's bills down, and build that resilience in our national economy, a more secure economy, as well as that responsibility that my generation has to pass on to future generations a greener and an inhabitable planet. But I do think there is more that we can do to have a more secure national economy, and it starts with energy, which is why Labour's Green Prosperity Plan, investing alongside businesses in some of the jobs and the industries of the future, is such a central part of my economic agenda.
Yeah, so just staying on the topic of the economy and obviously some of the plans you have for spending, it's fair to say that if you did get into number 11, you wouldn't have too much room to manoeuvre given the current economic situation. How do you find walking the line between trying to be sensible and trying to prove to the electorate that you can be trusted on the economy, but also trying to be innovative and exciting to try and inspire people to vote for Labour?
Well, I'm under no illusions about the scale of the task that an incoming Labour government would face. And we have to face that with determination, discipline, and the ironclad fiscal rules that I've set out. Because a secure economy and secure family finances and opportunities for young people have all got to be built on a rock of economic stability. Because we saw what happened last year when Liz Truss and the Conservative Party played fast and loose with the public finances and put family finances and the finances of young people in jeopardy. And I would never do that. I worked as an economist for many years at the Bank of England before I became a Member of Parliament. And I learnt there that your sums have always got to add up and economic responsibility has to come first. And yes, I've got exciting plans to unlock investment, to get more money into our National Health Service and our schools, to unlock the investment in some of those green industries of the future. But everything has to be built on that rock of stability. Otherwise, I'm afraid it will all come crashing down. And I would never put family finances and the finances of young people in jeopardy like that.
Okay, so if we just move on to some policy questions now. So last week, the Prime Minister announced that he wanted to scrap the Manchester leg of HS2. This was much to the disdain of northern leaders, including obviously the Labour Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham. You noted in your speech today that you'd open an independent expert inquiry into what went wrong with the project. But Labour ministers have made clear that they wouldn't undo the decision to cancel the northern leg if they did get back into office. Why wouldn't your party do this?
Well, I'm a Member of Parliament in Leeds, and so I'm deeply frustrated by the cancellation of HS2, the fact that the government has blown a huge hole in the budget. When the government cancelled it, it had already gone £30 billion over budget. That's totally unacceptable. That is losing a grip on public finances and it is wasting taxpayers' money. And I would never allow that to happen. That's why I talk about having an iron discipline on the public finances. But the truth is, as I said before, we are going to inherit a really tough economic and fiscal situation with high levels of government debt, poor levels of economic growth, and so many things in need of repair. I mean, frankly, is anything in Britain working today after 13 years of Conservative government? And it means that we're not going to be able to fix everything as quickly as we want. And it means we're not going to be able to commit to multi-billion-pound schemes if the money is not there, and the government have wasted that money. It makes me so angry, but I'm not going to be able to pick up off the shelf a project that they have let get out of control.
So staying on that topic then of projects that might cost quite a bit of money coming into government, earlier this year it was reported that Keir Starmer had U-turned on a policy that commitment he made in his 2020 leadership bid, which is on tuition fees. Despite admitting that they don't work for students or for universities, Starmer U-turned on the policy, saying we find ourselves in a different financial situation. Do you expect Labour to return to this policy soon, and how much of a priority would it be for you as Chancellor?
It would cost billions of pounds to get rid of university tuition fees. And look, the truth is, in the economic situation we find ourselves in, to commit to that without being able to say where the money is going to come from, it's just a false promise. And we won't make false promises. We won't let people down. Does that mean that I think the system of student finance works well today? No, of course it doesn't. Particularly people who graduate and never have huge earnings end up being burdened with huge interest rates and debt that they can never pay off. And Bridget Phillipson has spoken a little bit, Bridget's our shadow education spokesperson, about how we might want to make some of those changes. But all of those changes will be fully costed and fully funded, and we'll set out more detail ahead of the election. But look, there are good Labour things that we won't be able to do because of the state that the Conservatives have left our public finances in.
Okay, and again, just another policy, talking about Labour's plans on house building, which you referenced in your speech today. It's a topic that our audience really cares about. You know, we have an audience of younger people. Do you mind briefly outlining how Labour would ensure that the younger generation are able to get onto the housing ladder?
Yeah, I mean, I was lucky enough to buy my own flat in my 20s. And I've got children today, they're at primary school. But I know that if things carry on like this, they may never be able to buy a home of their own. And I find that deeply worrying and deeply troubling, because it used to be the norm that you worked hard, you put a little bit aside, and then after a while you'd be able to buy a home of your own. And for too many young people today, I know that that dream seems increasingly out of reach. Keir has set an ambition that he wants 70% of households to own a home of their own. We are well off of that today. Now, the first thing we need to do to get there is to build more housing. But there are other things that are necessary as well, and we've started to set out some of our plans about how we're going to free up the planning system and get the diggers in the ground and get Britain building again. But I also set out in my conference speech today that overseas buyers of British properties will pay a higher rate of stamp duty because a house should be, first of all, a home and not an asset. And so by charging them a bit more, we can try and speed up the planning system to get more homes built for young people and families to get on the housing ladder.
Okay, so just again moving on to another sort of topic that's been in the news a lot lately, and that's the expansion of the ultra-low emission zone in London. And this is something that led obviously to a Tory victory in Uxbridge and South Ruislip in the by-election. The lesson the Tories seem to be taking from this is the public aren't all that keen on net zero policies. What lesson do you think the Labour Party should take from it?
Well, it was obviously a disappointing result for Labour in that by-election, and the by-election taking place just a few weeks before the ultra-low emission zone was to be expanded to cover all of London was obviously not a great backdrop for that by-election. But I'm not convinced that the government have learnt the right lessons from that by-election. That by-election took place during a massive cost of living crisis, and ULEZ was then adding an additional cost, and a lot of people were scared. Even people who weren't necessarily impacted by the ULEZ charge because their car was within the criteria. It wasn't a petrol and diesel car built before a certain date, but a lot of people worried that they were going to be caught up in it. But during a cost of living crisis, asking people to pay more to drive their kids to school or drive to the shops or drive to a doctor's appointment, that was unpopular. But that was a cost of living thing. I'm not convinced it was about net zero or meeting our climate obligations. Actually, people of whatever age they are and wherever they live in the country regard our obligations to pass on to our children and grandchildren a green and an inhabitable planet really matters to people. And so, the government rowing back on its commitments, including the commitment to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars, I think that's a mistake. And it's also not supported by industry because they see the jobs of the future and the industries of the future in electric vehicles and the batteries needed to produce those electric vehicles. And the industry want to make sure those cars are built in Britain. So putting back the date actually is no good for business, it's no good for jobs. And actually, as the price of electric vehicles is falling, actually I'm not even convinced it's going to be good for consumers. So I think the government are taking the wrong lessons from this. People do care about the environment, they do care about climate change. You just turn the telly on any day of the week and you hear another story about the impacts of catastrophic climate change, whether that is in Britain or somewhere else around the world. We do need to act, and Britain needs to play its part.
So just moving on to some more sort of Labour-specific questions. Recently, Keir Starmer reshuffled his cabinet, moving some more moderate ministers into key jobs. Do you think this has the potential to sort of frustrate some other factions within the party?
I just don't see it like that. Keir wants to have the best people in the job going into the general election next year, bringing people like Hilary Benn back into the shadow cabinet as shadow Northern Ireland secretary, promoting someone like Peter Kyle to the digital and science brief. These are appointments of highly talented shadow ministers. Someone like Shabana Mahmood as shadow justice secretary, somebody who worked in the legal profession before she became an MP and is deeply committed to securing justice for people. So I think these were really exciting appointments and put us in a really good shape going into the next election.
So just sort of to wrap up with then, part of obviously what we do is we create videos for on YouTube for a bit of a younger audience, but many of this in this demographic don't feel that optimistic or hopeful about the future. Do you think that there's a lack of hope and optimism in politics, and what do you think can be done to actually change this?
I think part of the role of the Labour Party is to restore hope in politics. And that's also why I spoke about security today, because from security comes hope. But we've had 13 years of chaos and insecurity and frankly decline. And I think the questions that people are going to be asking at the next election are pretty straightforward. Are me and my family better off after 13 years of Conservative government? Do our schools, our hospitals, our transport system, does that work better than when the Conservatives came into office 13 years ago? And frankly, does anything in Britain work better today when they came into office? I think the answers to those questions are no. People know it is time for change. And I hope now when people look at the Labour Party, they see a changed Labour Party on the side of working people, on the side of young people, determined to do more to unblock the planning system so we can get the homes built, determined to meet our commitments on climate change and get those good jobs and investment in Britain, and also the start of rebuilding our public services, our schools, our hospitals, that frankly after 13 years of Conservative mismanagement are on their knees. I came into politics to turn that around, and I'm determined to do that in government.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.